Welcome to another Ronel Talks Money show. Now, you will know that I always, when I talk about financial freedom, I always say that one of the best ways, in my opinion, to achieve financial freedom is to start and grow a successful and sustainable business. And I believe there's no better way to learn how to do it than to hear from people who have been through this journey and learn from their experiences and the lessons that they have learned. So before we start with today, I just want to remind you, please go and subscribe to the channel and also go on the link in the description where you can enter the giveaway competition where you can win one of my books, Financially Fit and Wealthy. But today we have an entrepreneur with me that I know for many years, and I have actually basically seen her journey from where we were working together back in the corporate world and how she started off. And we have Heidi with us today. She is the founder and financial director of Nova Chocolate. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with Nova Chocolate, but I promise you, if you are a chocolate addict like myself, it is the best chocolate. So go out and go get yourself some to try it out if you are not familiar with it. And the nice thing about it, it is sugar-free. So an additional benefit to the taste. So, but without telling you too much, I want to give over to Heidi. Heidi, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Ronel. I feel very privileged to be part of your show and your chat. I've been following you as well, obviously, since our days back when we worked together. And so I feel very honored that you've asked me to share my experiences with you.
Okay, no, I'm really looking forward to listen to all your tips and your whole journey. But I think we must maybe just, you can maybe just start off by telling the viewers a little bit more about yourself and basically your journey before you started Nova Chocolate.
Okay, well, how far should I go back? I'll go back to, I was born and bred in Johannesburg until I was 15. And then my parents, horror of all horrors, moved to Ladysmith in Natal when I was 15. So I finished my high school years there in Ladysmith. I was actually going to study to become an architect, believe it or not. And at the very last minute, I had done well in accountancy at school, decided to go the safe route, and became a chartered accountant. I went and studied at the University of Natal in Durban. Studied there, did my articles with Arthur Anderson in Durban, and then transferred back to Johannesburg with them before starting my corporate career, which was basically what I was in my whole life. And one of the funny things, I mean, we'll get into it later, when I left and went to an employment agent, because of all the stock takes that I had done in my articles, I said, I don't want to work in any company where I have to count stock. So that was how I got into financial services, actually. So started at Hollard Insurance. From there, went to Alexander Forbes, actually to Investment Solutions, which is now Alexander Forbes Investments. Worked there for many years. When I had my daughter, she was my second child, I thought, didn't really want to, how am I going to be a mother and work? So I took a year off, but then realized actually being a mother and, it is amazing, but I wanted to go back to work. So because of my relationship with Forbes, I went back to Alexander Forbes, where I actually was very much in the role that you did when we met at Forbes. And then from there, I went to Momentum Manager of Managers and ended up at Momentum Investments. And then in 2015, my husband got a payout from selling his company. And by that stage, my son was in high school. My daughter was also approaching high school. I thought I didn't like the rigidity anymore of that corporate environment where I couldn't go and watch sports games, where I was working the 8 to 5 and so on. And I was in the fortunate position where once again, my husband said, well, if you want to stop working, which is when I left Momentum. And that was shortly after you had left. And yeah, so I spent another year at home doing nothing, so to speak. Obviously spending more time with my children, working on the house, doing, the things that I wanted to do that I couldn't do when I was working, but that didn't last very long. And so it had always been our intention that my husband had this payout, that we would look for another opportunity. And one day he came along, he had been playing golf, and he came home and he said to me, how would you like to sell chocolate? And he said, and sugar-free chocolate. And I was like, are you mad? I mean, sugar-free chocolate. I mean, anybody who eats chocolate enjoys it. And certainly the thought of sugar-free chocolate puts them off. So initially I was like, no. But anyway, he had met a chocolatier who had this concept of the sugar-free chocolate and was looking for an investor. And so we tasted the chocolate, and as you said at the beginning, it's very, very nice chocolate. It's not your usual sugar-free chocolate, which unfortunately does have a bad rap because of the artificial sweeteners. They don't generally have a good taste, whereas ours, we use maltitol, it does. So having tasted the chocolates and the various flavors that had been developed by our chocolatier, we were sold on it. And so that was where we decided to invest our money. And initially I thought, okay, well, I'm a chartered accountant, I've got experience, I can kind of do all the admin of the business, let them make the chocolate. Well, those were famous last words. If I thought that corporate kept me busy and away from my children, little did I know that running your own business, it's a 24/7 thing. But as I'll get into later, a far more rewarding experience than working in corporate, which obviously also had its benefits. But once again, we'll get into that later.
Okay, yeah, I think that's such an interesting story, and you sometimes think it is always interesting to listen people kind of like in how your journey basically flows and how you just end up in a certain place, and it's just kind of the right place for you, but it just happens in kind of strange ways. But then now, like you've mentioned, okay, so this is now how you got to the idea of having a chocolate business. But how did you actually start? Because then obviously there was this thought and it was like, okay, maybe we should do this. But then what went through your mind? What were the kind of steps that you followed to really get this going?
Okay, so that yeah, it is quite interesting. We started at home, so I mean, we didn't even have premises. The chocolate was being made by the chocolatier. He's actually a chef, so he had a kitchen at the back of his mother's house, funnily enough, where he was making the chocolates. So that was how he started. He was making the chocolates in the kitchen. What had happened is he had met somebody who was selling a chocolate tempering machine, because he was tempering by hand on the stove. And tempering of chocolate is actually quite a finicky business. You have to get it up to a certain temperature, keep it there, and then cool it and so on. So we bought a tempering machine, a secondhand one that somebody was selling. And she then knew somebody else who had actually designed the Nova brand, that logo that you see on our packaging, and had actually designed some of the packaging already. And she was selling chocolates at craft markets and fairs and that kind of thing, also kind of homemade chocolate. She was a graphic designer, but she was immigrating, so she wanted to sell her concept. So we were very, very fortunate that the packaging was already kind of designed, and a lot of the packaging that you see the Nova chocolate in was already there. At least the first few flavors. We have subsequently obviously designed newer packaging. But so it was there. So it was okay. Well, let's get this going. So once again, me as the admin chartered accountant person, had to start everything from registering a company, appointing directors, opening a bank account, registering for VAT, doing all those kinds of things that we learn about when we are studying and working in big corporates, but don't actually get to actually do. So that was how we started. And that was in the March. That was in the March that we decided to do it. We then had our first show, which was in those days the wine Groves and Vineyards at Casalinga, and that was where we launched. We booked a stall, and so that was where we sold our first lot of chocolates. Was at the Groves and Vineyards show at Casalinga in May of 2017.
That's awesome.
And yeah, that was how it started.
Yeah, I think, but I think to maybe just take you back one step. A question that I get a lot, and I think people who are in the corporate world, that is something that they are quite intrigued to know in terms of that transition from being in the corporate world, for many years, going into the entrepreneurial kind of space, because the two are completely different. It's very structured. You get your monthly salary. There is quite a bit of security to going to an environment where there's almost kind of no structure, and you basically need to figure out everything as you go along. How did you deal with that kind of transition?
Okay, so moving from a corporate to an entrepreneur, I mean, I had a bit of a transition where I was actually doing nothing, just being a stay-at-home mom. It's very, very different. Obviously, as I alluded to earlier, being in the corporate, it's quite rigid. You've got that, well, and particularly pre-COVID, obviously, working 8 until 5. Whereas when you're an entrepreneur, you can define your own hours. However, it kind of turns around, and as I said as well, your business is actually 24/7. Also, in a big corporate, you would know, you've got somebody to do payroll, you've got somebody, if you need to register a company, you've got a group secretarial department that will do that for you, you've got a tax department, you've got an HR department, you've got a department that does everything that needs to be done in the business. Whereas when you're an entrepreneur, suddenly you have to take care of all of these things yourself. So I'm still the HR manager. I'm still the accountant. I eventually handed payroll over. I started doing payroll, but when it came to having to submit EMP, PAYE recons and so on, I thought, no, I'm not going to get myself into trouble with SARS or with the government. So I did outsource that. But I mean, that is exactly it. Suddenly everything is your responsibility. Whereas when you're in corporate, there are people that can do that. And if you've got an issue, that you can go to assist you. And I mean, that is absolutely one of the biggest challenges. But on the other hand, I also found it very, very exciting to actually do, as I said, the nitty-gritties and the practicalities of everything that we've learned. And it was a very steep learning curve. It was actually, I think, quite exciting that for the first time, my experience and my expertise and my qualifications were being put to good. I felt that I was using them holistically and bringing it all together, not just focusing on one aspect of everything that I had learned, theoretically up until that point. So it was challenge that I found the challenge exciting, and the fact that at this late stage in my life, I was actually learning quite a lot as well. So that was exciting. As I said, the disadvantages were that suddenly everything does fall onto one's own lap, and I couldn't just turn to somebody else to help me out with some of the more technical issues that I needed. That obviously that came my way. That was, I'd say, the biggest challenge. And as I said, I had wanted to have more flexibility. Unfortunately, that didn't quite work out. You can have the flexibility, but then you've got to understand that if you've gone to watch a sports game, that you have to catch that work that you should have been doing at a later stage. So I think that was the biggest challenge, is suddenly becoming a jack of all trades rather than just focusing and specializing on one area. And then obviously the fact that I was also now responsible for the livelihoods of the people working for me, for the factory staff and the admin staff, that we employed over a period of time. It's a big responsibility. But on the other hand, you weigh up the pros and cons. You're also responsible for creating your own culture. So, we've created, I think, a fun culture in our company. Not to say that I haven't had that in corporate, but the point is that I was creating and creating a business rather than working in a business and being part of something that had already been created.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think that was my experience as well, that almost that learning curve is so steep. But I think like if you just put it all together, it does make you, I believe, a much more rounded individual and person, because I think it's almost just as if the world opens up to you in terms of your skill set and your experiences and all of that. But I think then apart from that transition, there was also, you mentioned that during your articles, you did some stock takes and that, but that is also quite different from, having your own stock and then have to manage that. And then you've moved into the services industry where you didn't have to deal with selling products and selling like in physical stock management and all of that, to now going back into your own business and now have to deal with products and stock and all of that. What lessons did you learn in that process?
Sure. Well, as I've mentioned, all the lessons I've learned new skills, as I said, in terms of just HR and all of that. But in terms of managing stock, I don't think we've quite got it right yet, even now. Having worked in financial services, I think there are many aspects there. You're selling a service, so you're selling an idea or a promise. I think, particularly in financial services, whereas I moved into obviously now selling something where you can get instant gratification, and it's also probably an easier sell because everybody likes chocolate, and our chocolate is so good that it kind of sells itself. So from that aspect, it was easier. The difficulties were that obviously, having been in the corporate where it was a financial service, pricing was already determined. That's how much it costs you to have an investment or a financial service to pay for that service. Whereas now moving into the retail space was now finding out what all the costs were that we would be encountering. It's not only the cost of the product, it's the cost of getting the product to market that we had to worry about. And then the price point. How much is somebody prepared to pay for a slab of chocolate? And obviously that was a huge thing at the beginning. We almost had to do it roundabout. We had to say, okay, well, how much is somebody prepared to pay? What are our costs? And therefore, how many units do we have to sell to be able to make a profit and cover the fixed costs? Mm-hmm. So that's taken us a bit of time to get right. I don't want to preempt any of your questions that you're still going to ask, but that was it was a complete change. But then again, I think our studying and our theoretical background had provided that for me. So, it wasn't difficult changing the mindset, but obviously it was procedures and new ways of doing things that I had to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think one of the biggest challenges that most entrepreneurs face is about funding. How do you go about funding your business, and what worked for you, or what did you apply? Did you self-fund the business? Did you get some funding in, or what did you do?
Okay, so initially we self-funded. As I said, I was in the fortunate position that my husband had sold his business, and we had extra funds that we needed. We would we wanted to invest somewhere, And like you preach and you teach, is that you're owning your own business and being an entrepreneur is probably the best way of ensuring that you get the best returns from your money. We still have to see that, but we're getting there. We have the vision. So we self-funded initially. We bought everything with the cash that we had. Obviously, over time, it's kind of a vicious circle because to get funding from banks, you first have to have a track record. But to get a track record, you need funding. So over time, we managed to obviously then get overdraft facilities. And then once we started selling into retail, fortunately as well, a lot of the retailers have debtors financing because, they only pay after 90 days, but they allow you to then draw down your debtors payments, obviously at a cost. So we make a lot of use of that. Unfortunately, just before COVID hit, we were running out of money. We did have to dilute, and we did bring in other investors. And so finally, now that because we'll get to that as well. You don't kind of foresee all the expenses and the hidden kind of things that are going to jump out at you. We kept on thinking, okay, we've got enough, we can do this. Unfortunately, the company did take a little bit longer to get off the ground than we had hoped, and we did have some setbacks, which we'll also get into later. But that was basically we self-funded initially. And it's funny now that we are starting to now suddenly we can get funding. Now we can people overseas creditors are now happy to give us terms, whereas before we couldn't get terms and so on.
Yeah, it's almost that chicken and egg kind of situation, when you really need the funding, you can't get it. And then when you do not maybe need it that much anymore, then it seems to be a lot easier to get it. But I think you have now already mentioned a couple of challenges that you have faced. But what would you say, what were your biggest challenges and how did you overcome those?
So obviously we had this great product. An ongoing challenge is getting people, is creating awareness of our product. And the best way to do that is obviously for them to taste, because as soon as you hear sugar-free chocolate, as we spoke about earlier, people don't really, they're like, oh no, if I'm having a chocolate, I'm having a proper chocolate. So is to get them to create awareness of our product and to get people to taste it so that they can then buy it on an ongoing basis. That's an ongoing challenge of ours. We've had all sorts of challenges. Initially, the old saying of if it's too good to be true, it probably is. We were very fortunate. One of the big retailers asked us to do a special Christmas edition chocolate balls for them, and they offered us a lot of money, and we said, yay, we'll do it. But of course, it wasn't our core business, and we ended up actually losing a lot of money because we took our eyes off the main business of making slabs, which we knew and which we were good at, and focused on the special once-off Christmas order that was going to make us a lot of money. And by taking our eye off the ball, we actually ended up dropping it. So we underestimated the labor that would be required to do that. We underestimated the volumes, and we just didn't actually have the capacity to take on such a huge order, essentially. So that was one of the big challenges that we faced, but we recovered from that. COVID has obviously been a challenge, but we'll get more into that later. Then there's just all kinds of little things. It's all very well we're going to sell chocolates, and then we would get a contract to get into the big retailers. Like we got into Dis-Chem first, and it was yay, we're in there. So now we said, but the thing is, as I said, it doesn't help that your product is on the shelf and nobody's buying it because they don't know what it is, they haven't tasted it. So then it was, okay, well, we need merchandisers to make sure that the product is in the correct place on the shelf where people can find it, and of course then getting people to taste it. So those are ongoing challenges. And then logistics has also been something that we've finally managed to get that done. getting our products to the customers, whether it be big retailers, and we also have a lot of smaller customers, online orders, and so on. So we've had to try various things, and obviously being chocolate, that it shouldn't be refrigerated, so we can't use refrigerated transport. But on the other hand, in South Africa, where it gets hot, you can't have your chocolate melting either. So getting those kind of challenges, we faced those, but we've managed to bed those down through trial and error, as one does.
Yeah, I think that also comes back to that what I said earlier, in terms of you need to figure it out as you go along, and then you realize, okay, now maybe I should change this a bit, or no, this doesn't work, I need to change this a bit. I think I also want to ask you, because I think that is also a challenge to many businesses, where you are selling more like a lower cost item, but you obviously have like a lot of costs and fixed costs, and there's distribution and all those kind of things that you need to take into consideration. How do you still ensure that you are profitable?
Well, as I said, we've only recently become profitable. For us, and we knew it all along, it was about scalability. We needed to increase volumes. We tried various ways of doing that. So by increasing the flavors and the variants of the slabs. But the problem with doing something like that is you cannibalize your existing. So if you're selling a plain chocolate and now you introduce a chocolate with a flavor, people are not going to buy the plain chocolate anymore. So that kind of evens out. So it's just about trying to get into different sales channels, which we've slowly over the 4.5 years that we've been going managed to do, just plugging away at it, and expanding our market, which we had to do, because our fixed costs are what they are, but we can take on more production volume. It's about getting the sales. So that's had to be our focus for now. And we've tried all sorts of things. We've tried looking at exporting, which we also have decided, let's rather cement our position in South Africa first, get our product to be well known here. And when we have exported a few times, and we do have a few export customers, but our focus has been on the South African market for now. We've also then recently, because we previously only did dark chocolate, and we decided to bring in milk and white chocolate as well. So that also hasn't, because people either like dark chocolate, it hasn't taken away from our dark chocolate sales so much as it did when we just changed the flavors within dark chocolate. So that's how we've had to do it, is by obviously just increasing volumes and number of units sold.
Yeah, I think that is quite interesting, kind of how you need to find ways to basically make it work. But then I think also we've talked a little bit about stock management now. And I know, I've been to so many different places in the country, and you go to Clarence and you see there's Nova chocolate, and you go to Cape Town and you see there's Nova chocolate. Which is obviously a big achievement to be kind of visible and be all over. But I mean, that must also be, quite a challenge, because how do you manage all of that? And now this little store in Clarence, how do you keep track of who's having what and what's still kind of in the delivery phase? And so how did you deal with that, or what kind of tips can you give us in terms of stock management?
Okay, so when we started, I mean, as I said, we had to do everything from scratch. So even when I took on being the accountant of Nova, it was, I don't even have an accounting package. So I was initially using Sage Online, which is a very basic kind of, if you're just a one-man business providing services, very easy. We quickly learned that we actually need proper stock systems. Also, because we are in the food industry, we need batch numbers and expiry dates on our stock, because our stock does expire. So we needed a more sophisticated system, which we obviously had to then that was one of the things, once again, when we were doing our initial planning. We didn't plan on having to spend money on an expensive accounting or stock system, but eventually it was a no-brainer. We had to do it. And that's what we've had to do, because we have to be able, as you said, if somebody in Clarence has a problem with a slab of chocolate, we have to be able to trace back to exactly what the issue was. Why does it have a cocoa moth in it, or a piece of plastic, which we've had as well? I mean, that these kind of mishaps do happen. And so that was the first thing, was making sure we got a good stock system in. And in the early days, it was easy when we were only selling a few slabs. Now, obviously, it's a huge process to keep track of all the stock. Every invoice that goes out has to have a batch number of the stock, so obviously we can trace it back. Stock control has been quite challenging. As I said, it's not my forte. I don't enjoy it. Come month end, everybody at the factory knows to stay out of my way, because I'm in a bad mood usually when it's stock count time. Trying to reconcile it and make sure that we can account for every single thing, and it's packaging and it's raw materials and finished goods and. But it is doable. I would just say make sure that you have a good system in place, and obviously training the staff as to what their role is in the whole thing, and making them understand the importance of, as I said, batch numbers, expiry dates, making sure they know where the stock is. We initially, as I said, the chocolatier who was producing was in charge of stock. We eventually realized he couldn't do that, so we trained one of our factory staff to be the warehouse manager. So he's pretty good. He knows exactly where everything is when stock levels are running low, so that we can reorder. And that actually, just to go back to your previous question of what one of our challenges has been with the funding, is we've had to very, very carefully manage our cash flows, because it's chocolate, it's imported. So our cash flow cycle is quite long. We have to pay, because we can't get terms. We have to pay for our imported stock before it even leaves overseas. It then takes about 6 weeks to get to us. We then have to manufacture the chocolate, sell it to our customers who have terms. So our cash flow cycle is about at least 4 months, before we get our money back. So balancing the stock as to when we order a container, and obviously trying to push creditors and get terms for the local stock, such as the packaging and everything that we get in South Africa, has been very, very tricky as well. And then of course balancing supply and demand, because it's all very well that retailers don't buy the same quantities every month, and nor do consumers. People tend to eat more chocolate in winter than summer, so they obviously, funnily enough. So the demand is higher in those months, and then the retailers kind of stock up for in now September, October, November, and then December and January will be quiet months. But we had to learn that over the 4 years. So that has helped us, and we've managed to then refine our stock management, and when we order our raw materials, and when we build up stock, in anticipation of bigger orders and so on. And once again, trying to get that balance right has been very, very challenging for us. But once again, you live and learn.
Yeah, I can actually imagine, and I think that basically fits in with my my next question about cash flow, because I can actually imagine, that your turnaround period, and you obviously need to fund all of that until the time that you get your money, but obviously, because you mentioned 4 months, but then obviously in between there's VAT that needs to be paid, there's probably some taxes that needs to be paid, staff needs to be paid, all of that kind of thing, water and electricity. So what kind of tips do you have in terms of cash management, that you kind of map out what your typical cash flow looks like, and then you try to put away cash for your big cash to cover your cash outflows until you get that money. Have you built up some kind of reserve fund, or what are you doing to help you manage your cash?
Okay, so as I said previously as well, we've only just started making money. So up until now, it's been us putting cash in every time we've needed. That was why us personally finally ran out of cash, because of the long cash flow cycle. And obviously with a business that's growing, it's kind of snowballing and getting worse and worse and worse. We've been very, very fortunate that we've managed to get into a lot of the big retailers. Look, they come with all their issues and their hidden costs as well, their rebates and so on. But most of the big retailers, Pick n Pay being the one that comes to mind mainly, with their enterprise and supplier development scheme, they pay within 15 days of invoice, and then a lot of them, of the others, as I mentioned before, allow you to draw down. So so that's what we make use of. That the funding there is much cheaper than overdraft and other sources of funding. So fortunately, we've been able to draw down and in most cases we can get our cash from retailers relatively quickly. It's been quite a challenge to manage cash up until this point, because we haven't been making money. Now that we have built up reserves, it is becoming a lot better. And funnily enough, now that we're making money, we can now start pushing to get terms from our overseas suppliers. So up until this point, cash has been the biggest stress in our business and cash flow. So and that's basically why we've needed more funding and battled with funding all this time. Just managing so I'm very austere. Because I sign and approve everything. Everything is triple checked, double checked. Over the course of the 4 years, we've managed to find suppliers that give us good, we've tried different transporters, for instance. So, and managed to bring our costs down there. Same with packaging and all of that. It's just about shopping around, getting the lowest costs. Once again, scalability, for instance, with packaging. It's also kind of a chicken and an egg. The more packaging you order, the cheaper it is. But of course, it costs you more ultimately. So it's just been trial and error, trying to see what works best, what is the cheapest, but that's the other thing. Something that is the cheapest is not necessarily the best, and it can come back to bite you. That's been the hardest part, I must say, is managing the cash and getting that balancing act right. But that's what I wanted to say. There are lots of programs and systems that are out there for small businesses. Even the banks, I mean, they want to help small businesses. If you can show that you are profit, or that you have sales and customers, that you can bring in money, banks are prepared to assist you. And as I said, and customers as well, and suppliers. A lot of our suppliers realize the potential of Nova. They work with us because obviously the bigger we get, the more we'll buy from them, and they'll benefit from it. So we've been very fortunate. We've been able to create good relationships with our suppliers and with all the business partners that we interact with.
I think cash flow together with funding, I think that is always kind of the biggest challenges that you need to overcome. And I think it is also, in most instances, it takes a lot longer than what you anticipate to get to that position where you feel, okay, now we are breaking even and we are kind of moving in the right direction where we want to be. But I think another thing that I can also imagine that can be quite hard, and I especially refer to what's been happening now during lockdown, where so many people have started to, try to create additional income and, baking cook sisters and baking this and selling that. But I know there are quite a lot of regulatory and health and safety type of checks and balances and laws and regulations that need to be in place. And I think quite often people just starting doing these things, from their kitchen or from their garage are not always aware of all these things. So maybe you can just inform us a little bit about what are the things that people should know about.
Yeah, look, I think that's very important. I think any entrepreneur who starts, and that's the thing, because people who are entrepreneurs generally don't have a financial background, so they as you said, making what they're passionate about. So it's making things or selling things. That's what their interest is and what their focus is on. You need to have somebody who can advise you or help you. So obviously, luckily, I had the background that I kind of knew. So when I registered the company, luckily the CIPC does send you, once you've registered a company, a whole list of things that you need to look for, that make sure you registered for tax, what the implications are of registering for that. So I would say you need to get a good accounting person or somebody that can advise you on that. There are also lots of other companies out there that provide assistance. We found CISA. They assist us, for instance, with labor disputes, with our BEE compliance, also consumer protection and POPI and then that kind of thing, where you pay a subscription and when you need them, you call on them and they help you. So we've obviously we make use of that. Also, as I said, for things like skills and BEE, they also assist there. And then we, as a food company, have to comply with food and safety. Obviously, being in the retailers, they require that we have a food and safety audit, which we have to do annually. So there we had to implement a whole lot of, obviously, as I alluded to earlier, being batch tracing and being able to trace all your batches and so on. But for somebody who's starting a business, I would say just even if it's just a once-off consultation on as to what the requirements are for VAT, because not everybody has to register for VAT, but you need to know when you have to, get an accountant to help you with the tax, and get an accountant or somebody to just help you with managing the financial side of the business, because people think they're doing well, but in the meantime, they don't see where the cash is going, and before they know it, they don't have any money left. So definitely get an accountant to help you and somebody that can give you advice on just the little pitfalls. And it's not to say it's not that you necessarily need somebody there all the time, but just somebody that you can get advice from. I think those are all the regulatory things that I can think of. It is mainly the government things such as VAT and tax that people must be aware of.
Okay. And then I think another you've mentioned now about your husband. I don't know how heavily involved he is in the business, but this is more of a family type of business. And obviously with that comes again different challenges. And sometimes people say that I would love to work with my husband or my wife, and once they are into it, they want to kill each other. So I think there's also challenges. And how did you deal with that?
So my husband worked in the business for a short while. He still is a shareholder, and obviously he has major input into it. It was wonderful working for him. He's a wonderful boss, but I think the personal issue did come into it. It's very hard to not take things personally. So we did have a few fallouts, but on the other hand, we also know where the other one is coming from, and so there is a mutual respect. He has been very, very supportive, and he is a very good board to bounce ideas off and to assist, because he's also knowledgeable about how to run a business and is able to give good advice. So I've been very lucky that we've worked together. kind of not every day, but no, it has worked well. As I'm not going to lie and say it was all that it's all been plain sailing. I mean, we have, and we still continue to have arguments occasionally, especially when there is a lot of stress around cash flow and money coming in and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, it's also great because we have each other's support. So it can work. Before we worked together, I would have said, no, not working for my husband, not prepared to do that. But actually working with him was a good workout. He just needed to actually go and get a real job to support us while Nova was still taking off. And so it's worked out well for us.
Okay, now that's really good to know. And I think then the question that everybody probably had to deal with to some kind of extent during this last year or 18 months, all about lockdown. What kind of impact did lockdown had on your business? And if it did have an impact, how did you deal with that?
So initially, when we all heard about COVID for the first time and about this potential lockdown, our major concern was, we knew it, but we weren't sure whether the government knew it, is chocolate an essential food? Okay, which fortunately it is. So we were able to continue through lockdown, which obviously, I mean, if we had not been able to, we would not have survived. So fortunately for us, we had just got the new investors in who were very understanding, and obviously COVID and lockdown wasn't anybody else's fault. So we were fortunate we were able to continue. In terms of things like PPE, our staff already wear gloves and masks and all of that because they're working with food. So all we needed to do was we just split our staff into 2 shifts so that we kind of spread our risk. If somebody did happen to get COVID, that it would only be 1 shift. We implemented more thorough deep cleaning on a more regular basis. I mean, we do have deep cleaning at our factory once a week. And we actually, during the hard lockdown, hired a bus and fetched our staff. Our staff were not, and brought them to work. Some of them lived closer, it wasn't a problem. But we actually hired a bus and a driver and brought our and physically fetched and took our staff home. So we were very fortunate. Touch wood, we have not had a COVID case at our factory. Obviously, the retail, in terms of just general retail, people were spending less. So our sales definitely declined during lockdown, but we've come out of it, and fortunately, we were able to continue to continue through lockdown. And I say to people, if we were able to do that, then we have to make a success of this. If we can manage and survive through lockdown, we can survive through anything.
Yeah, I think that is a valid point. I think like in anybody who has just managed to just survive through this period, don't even think about making profits or cash flow or anything. Just kind of the fact that you are still here, I think makes all of us kind of big achievers and successful and whatever you want to call it already. So I'm glad to hear that you haven't had a major impact in your business, and you have shared so many, tips and lessons learned and experiences. But if you have to basically taking into account everything that you've learned, the journey that you have encountered to get to where you are today, what would be the advice that you would give to aspiring entrepreneurs or small businesses who are still in that, the starting phase, that startup phase? What can you tell them to help them to make their businesses successful and growing?
Okay, well, firstly, starting your own business it's not for sissies. Being an entrepreneur it's really not for sissies. We were talking about lockdown before. I think lockdown, as difficult as it has been for people, it has wiped, it's leveled the playing field. People have lost jobs, they've lost their businesses, and they have to start again. So in a way, as harsh as lockdown has been, I see it as being positive, because I think there is going to be people are going to have to find new ways of earning income, and I think it's almost a nursery or a growing field for entrepreneurs and for people to start their own businesses. So I think it's just about hanging in there. When you're feeling stressed, it's about knowing there is always a solution. There are other people out there who can help you, who are in your same boat. I mean, we've certainly found that in our business. A lot of our suppliers have battled and are small businesses and help each other, and they want to help you grow and succeed. So it's about feeding off those people and making use of the opportunities. Obviously, don't go blindly into opportunities. If it is too good to be true, it probably is. I firmly believe that. We've learned that. But it's about believing in yourself and knowing that you can do it. And look, a lot of the time, people don't have a choice but to persevere and just hang in there. It has to pay fruits and dividends. If you work hard at it, it will come off eventually, and just believe in yourself, believe in your business and your product. We've been very fortunate. Our product is one that people love it when they taste it. So we've been able to believe it. That's kept us going. So just believe in your product, believe that you can do it, because I think people can do it. I mean, that's how humans have survived, is by doing what they're passionate about and creating an income from it. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think something that also came through from your whole discussion was that kind of, just like you said, just keep on going. Half of the things you don't know and you have to figure it out, but also knowing that the other entrepreneurs who have been this also didn't know this. So they also kind of, figured it out. And I think for most people, if you just look at Nova chocolate and you think about, but you are already in all these big stores, whatever, you would think that, okay, but they've got it all figured out. And then you listen to you and you can obviously see, but you also had to, take all the small steps, and you also had to face the challenges, overcome the challenges to get to where you are today. So I really want to thank you for sharing your lessons and your experiences with us. It always helps to learn from other people, and just sometimes there's just that one thing that you say, okay, but this can actually just help me to become more successful or more profitable at what I do. So thank you, Heidi. We really appreciate your time that you've spent with us today and all the experience and knowledge that you have shared. Then to the viewers, I hope you have enjoyed this talk and that you've learned something from it. Remember to go to your nearest shop and go get your Nova chocolate if you haven't tasted it yet, or it's also available online, so you can order it there. And please give us some, if you have some questions or some comments, put it in the comments field. We will get back to you. And remember to subscribe to the channel and also enter the book giveaway competition. So this is everything from our side for now, but we will see you again at the next Ronel Talks Money show.